All right, so let's jump in. What would be the best place to start? Well, the best place to start is definitely going to be finding a good base mesh for our character. So there's a few options in ZBrush, as you can see under Project. If you press comma on your keyboard in ZBrush, you can pull up this menu and see a few different options. So you have this mail. If I double click on the mail, we can see what that looks like. I can turn on the polyframe, and even if I dial this down, I can see what this is looking like. And we could use this as our base mesh. I tend to like the other character that is in here under tools. I like this one that also comes with the brush called nickz underscore human male. I'm gonna double click on this and I'm gonna press com on my keyboard to close the panel. And let's look at this guy. So in this guy, I can tell that he's really smooth, right? So if I go into geometry, I can see that there's no subdivision levels, but yet he clearly looks like he's smoothed out, and he's only 13,000 points. So what does that mean? Well, that means in geometry under dynamic subdivision, the dynamic button is pressed. So I'm gonna uncheck it. Now I can see the actual representation of the character. So this is what he looks like. If I turn on the polyframe, I can see what the topology looks like. So I think this might be a better base mesh for what I'm looking to do in this exercise. So let's do that. So the other thing I'm going to go and look at is under subtools, you could see all the awesome things that he comes with. So he comes with teeth, he comes with the skull, he has the eye reflection and the eyeballs, right? And the hair. I definitely don't like his hair. I don't need the hair for our superhero guy. And I don't need the skull. So, you know, I'm gonna actually delete the things that I don't need. I'm not gonna use the skull. And I don't need the outside reflection part. Let's take a quick look and see. Yeah, I definitely don't need double geometry. I do like the eyeballs, but probably not these eyeballs. These are, I'm not sure. We'll take a better look and see if we can use them as a game model. Maybe. And what else? Definitely don't need the hair. Alright, so this is what I'm left with, right? I just have the body, the eyes, and the teeth. And actually I would love to review the teeth as well. The teeth could be useful, but honestly, I don't even think we're going to be opening his mouth. So maybe for this exercise, that's not necessary. But I'm just going to leave him for now, just in case we want to open his mouth maybe. It seems pretty low poly, and we can maybe optimize it even more if we needed to. Alright, so I'm gonna leave the body, the eyeballs, and the teeth, right? And this is what I have. Now, one of the things I could see right away is to create the character that I'm thinking of. All of this will work. The only thing that will not work is the feet. I don't want the feet, right? So if he had like a skin tight uniform on, all of this works because we can just draw right on the character. But I don't like the feet because then, you know, we need more of a shoe kind of thing. So I think there's many different ways of getting rid of the toes and just combining them into a more of a shoe shape. But the way I think I'm going to do it is I'm going to jump into Maya, because I'm planning on using both ZBrush, ZBrush, Maya, and Substance Painter to create this character. So let's jump into Maya and kind of combine the toes into a better shape for a shoe. And the only other thing that I want to point out about this character is if you go into, make sure you are on the body layer. And if you go into Z plugin, I have mine dragged on the left here. If you go into UV master and turn off symmetry and do a flatten, you can see what the UVs for this character look like, and they are done and beautiful. And we can use this to our advantage, because that means we don't have to do UVs for our character, because the type of character I'm planning on doing is kind of a skin tight uniform kind of thing, kind of like Spider-Man, right? So I'm not going to need to unfold any extra geometry. So that's really helpful for this specific example. So let's use that to our advantage and kind of skip the whole UV section. And yeah, so let's dive in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to export this out as a now I could try to use GoZ, but a lot of times I actually have issues going between GoZ and Maya personally. That's just my own thing. You guys could try it. When you click on it, it's supposed to shoot this model over to Maya. If that doesn't work for whatever reason, you could do it manually. You could just say export and just give your file a name. So in my case, I'm just going to make a folder on my desktop and call it game character. All right, so then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this whatever this is, human male .obj. Is that what I'm going to export this as? And obj is fine. That's not going to really matter to us, but I'm going to leave it as obj and just do a save. Now, when I save this out, I do want to point out that my groups were not turned on. If you go to preferences and go to import export, make sure that your groups are turned off, because if you have this button turned on, then all of these pieces that are polygrouped are going to be exported separately. So essentially, when you get into Maya, you'll have dozens of pieces. I don't want that. I actually want to export this out as one mesh. And for that, I just need to make sure that under preferences in import export, my groups are turned off. And I actually have this button dragged right here for me, so I could always keep an eye on it. And yeah, all right, so once you export your OBJ, let's jump into Maya. All right, so once I import my character into Maya, the OBJ file, this is what I'm seeing. Now, as long as you don't change the position of this character, so don't change the transform position of this character, then whatever you export out is going to be exactly in the same position and scale in ZBrush. So essentially, that is the manual kind of a GoZ flow. You can export out files as, you know, FBX or OBJ, and as long as you don't change their position, you can go back and forth between the two apps seamlessly. So keep that in mind. It's a cool little trick, very useful when you're working with different versions of the program, and sometimes GoZ is just simply not available. All right, so if we select our character, we can under poly modeling, we can click on the texture UV editor and see that all the UVs once again are beautifully laid out. You can also click on this button here to review the UVs and see how they're looking. Looks really good. All right, so I'm actually gonna turn that off. And of course, you can also see that the character is currently sort of pixelated, right? All the faces are kind of hard-edged. If we wanted to, we could select our character and go to mesh display and do a soft edge, and that will give us maybe a nicer visual of the model. And as you can see right now, the faces are 13,000 for this character so far for the base mesh. And that is considered, I would say, a mid-high poly. It's definitely not low poly, and it's definitely not high poly. Like if you making a high poly game character, it would probably be in the, currently in the industry, it would be somewhere between 25,000 to 50,000 polys, I would say. This is, you know, half of that, right? 13,000. So this is a mid poly. And then of course, if you are making a low poly character, a lot of times in the studio, they'll give you a limit. So maybe you can't go past 10,000 tries. Every studio is different based on the game engine they're using. But again, this is, I would definitely consider this a mid poly, which is great for like Unreal or Unity. So let's keep going. So the first thing I would like to do is combine the toes together into more of a shoe kind of thing, right? So how do we do this? Well, I want to try to do it without ruining the UVs. I really like how these UVs looking. So what would be the easiest way to do it? So I think maybe the easiest way to do it is just simply we can maybe just cut these toes out. Like essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm gonna press B, make sure my self-select is not on. What I would like to do is I need to cut off this section here, right? So like essentially all of these I would like to remove. And if you look at the UVs, that's going to be, of course, this section here and I need to do this on both sides, right? So I could turn on my symmetry and just simply press delete key. I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right. And now what I would like to do, now I just thought of this actually, let me undo this. If we wanted to have a reference of how far these toes are going after we delete this model, right? That's another really cool trick. A lot of times I'll do this if I need a reference. If I go into object mode and press, I have my outliner here as well, which is under Windows Outliner, right? I just simply drag mine in the corner. You could press Control D and then create another version of this, and then maybe double click on it and call it REF. And then go into your channel box and under display in layers, if you create a new layer, you can set this layer to, let's set it to template. And now what happens is if you go back into your original mesh, and then let's go back into faces. Now if we delete these faces like we did before, you can see we have kind of this wireframe showing us where the toes used to be, right? And that's coming from the reference of the template. And you can of course hide it if you don't want to look at it, but maybe this is useful for us to know how far the original mesh expanded. All right, so I'm gonna go into edge and double click on my edge, and keep in mind I'm still in the active symmetry mode, right? So I'm doing it on both sides, and I'm gonna click Control E to extrude. And instead of grabbing this extrusion here, I'm gonna go to my W tool or a move tool, and you can see it gives me yet more options for transformation gizmo, right? So now instead of just pulling that blue one that we had, I can actually pull this out and try to cover the toes. And let's go ahead and make sure it looks good from kind of the top view. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go between kind of his big toe here and the little toe and just kind of cover the distance. You could do that, or maybe if you think of it in terms of a shoe, it would just simply cover his toes, right? I guess that makes more sense. So something like this, I think, is makes sense to me. Now, if you pull out and look at the character, maybe just it starts to look kind of too large. All right, so I'm kind of ending at something like this. Now what I need to do is I need to close this off, right? So how do we do that? Well, I can just grab these edges and I can count them actually. So I'm going to click on this one, hold down Shift key and count 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if you don't want to count, you can also see in your heads up display that 16 are selected, meaning 8 on this side and 8 on this side, right? Which makes sense. If you don't have this heads up display, that's under Windows, I'm sorry, display, heads up display, and poly count is what I have turned on, right? That's this information here. So now what I need to do is select the opposite side. So I'm going to go from here to here, and you can see that gave me 32. So 8, 8, 8, 8, right? Let's go ahead and bridge. And let's add, for our toes, I'm going to give myself 2 subdivisions. So you could see 2 lines going across. And the reason this turned green is because Maya can't find the material that was used with this base mesh. So ignore, if that happens to you, just ignore that. We can fix that in 1 second. And the next thing I need to do is simply make these connections here. So I'm going to bridge this. Then I'm going to select and make a connection here. I'm going to press G to repeat my last command. I'm going to double click on this edge, press G, and that didn't work. Let's try to do it on this side. That also didn't work. It's trying to connect the two across because our active symmetry is on. So I'm going to turn off my active symmetry. If I double click on this edge, I should be able to fill hole. Oh, I see. So it's filling the hole, but then it's also finding the material. So that's what's happening here. And if you're not sure, you can always delete the face just for 1 second, and you can see clearly that it's not double faces or anything weird. So that actually works perfect. All right, so I'm gonna repeat the same thing here. Press G, and just go ahead and close the holes on both sides. Honestly, I'm not really sure why I can't do this with the active symmetry on, but it's okay. It just takes 1 second. Just double click on each edge and press G to repeat the command. So you should end up with something very similar to what I'm seeing. Next, let's right click and do apply existing material, and I'm just going to apply the Lambert, and that's going to unify the character with the same material, which is great. If you want to control the color of this while you're modeling, just right click, go to material attributes. If that doesn't work, just do it again. And once your Lambert shows, you can actually control the color of your character just while you're modeling. You know, you can make it whatever you want. In my case, I'm very happy with gray. All right. Nice. So next, let's go ahead and kind of mold these a little better. Now, before we do, one other thing that we could review is once we're done, let's select our base mesh and go back into our UVs, and we could see that our UVs are now, these are our toes, right? So that's going to be really important that we fix this. And that's going to be an easy fix. But before we fix that, again, let's go ahead and see if we can make this a little better, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is go to Insert Edge Loops, go to Options. I'm going to say Multiple. I'm going to make sure my I'm going to set this number to like maybe 3. Let's go with 3. And I'm going to make sure that active symmetry is on X, and just click on this line here. And that gives me the subdivision that makes sense, because if you look at the rest of the foot, this is sort of in alignment with the size of the grid, right? The squares, polygons. So I am happy with this. So essentially now what we did is we expanded manually the toes, and now we just have to shape them into what we need them to be, right? So we could do this back in zBrush, or we could do it here as well. You can go to sculpting, and you can grab your, this is your essentially move tool, just like you have in zBrush. So you can control the size of it, and you can kind of, if you hold down the B, you can control the brush size, and you can literally just sculpt it to what the foot should look like. You can hold on the Shift key to kind of melt it down, get rid of those sharp edges. And as long as your active symmetry is on, you can see you're doing it on both sides, right? Let's keep melting kind of this side. And honestly, I'm very happy with what I'm seeing. I think this is kind of what I was looking for. If you wanted to bulk something up, again, you can grab the move tool, make it kind of large. You can just move this up. Maybe move the bottom part up so it doesn't look like it's going through the floor. And if you're not sure, if you want to have a better angle of the fact that it's going through the floor, you can always press spacebar and go into like your side view here. You can see what's going on there. So just take the time and kind of mold it to what a base mesh with a shoe would look like. So maybe I'm happy with this. We can do more in zBrush, right? And I'm not really covering the toes all the way because I feel like maybe that's, maybe I should. All right. See, I'm flexible. This makes sense, right? It's just kind of like a shoe. All right, guess what? I'm happy with this. I'm going to move to the next level, which is I would like to make sure that my UVs look good. Now, if you turn off your wireframe, you can see that this is not smooth while this is. Oh, by the way, I'm also done with my reference. I no longer need this. I'm gonna press delete to get rid of it. And if you go back to your channel box, your layer is still there, but it's not in the outliner, so it's not gonna work essentially. So you can also delete it here as well. Now to fix this, right, all we need to do is just do a soft edge. And if you click on it, you can see in the channel box, we have all this history that we just made. Of course, you can go to poly modeling and clear your history, right? I do like my wireframes on so I can keep track of my topology. This is looking really cool for a base mesh. Now let's just take a look at the UVs, right? So this is where we are with the UVs. Now, one thing I could do is I can come here into my UV editor and click on this button here. which is gonna allow me to grab my shells. If I select the edge of this, press W and move this aside, you can see that these are all the original, and this is the new stuff that we just made, which is Maya doesn't yet know what that is and how to, what to do with this. So let's just simply kind of mimic what was there before, right? So first thing I'm going to do is go to my planer, and I'm just going to project it from the top. Press W, move it aside. Now, it makes a little more sense, right, as we're looking at this. And I'm going to hold on the Shift key and double click on this other piece here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply project it from the top. Press W, move it aside, and now we just have to make a seam, right? So where would be the best place to create a seam? Maybe let's double click on see if we can find a good place to make a seam. So I'm gonna make one, I think, here on the back. I think that makes sense. So let's do a cut, right click, double click, and do a unfold. And if we click on our UV checker map, we can review and make sure that nothing is stretched. And since this is stretched, you can see that this is a very poor job of unfolding, right? So this is how you can check if the UVs that you're doing make sense and look good, or if they are terrible. Because if you're gonna paint something like this in Substance Painter, you can see that this is clearly not a square, right? So your textures are going to be stretched and distorted. So keep that in mind. So I'm glad that we can review that and kind of go over that. So how do we fix this? Well, the way to fix it is definitely create more seams, right? So let's create another seam and let's take a look. So our current seam is going down to here. So let's maybe hold on the Shift key and select. I'm not happy with that. Let's go ahead and kind of grow. Trying to figure out what would be the best way of doing this. I think what I'm going to do is just grab the sole, the bottom part of the shoe. So to do this, I can't just double click on it, because if I hold on the Shift key and double click, you can see that my line is not following as I would like it to be. This makes sense right here, right? It's going all the way around, but then it starts to climb up, and I actually don't want that. So I'm gonna undo that. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna manually draw my, and we can turn this off now. I'm just gonna manually kind of control where the sole of the shoe is. So maybe like here. It's gonna be under the foot, so there's gonna be a good place to hide the seam, right? So let's go ahead and go from here to like all the way back. Alright, so as you can see, I just simply selected the sole on both sides. And what I'm going to do now is do a cut. Now, if I double click on the part that we just selected, I can press W and move it up. I can unfold it, and this is, as you can see, the sole. Now, if I double click on this and unfold this one more time, you can see that these unfolded in a much different way than before, which means if we turn this button on, you can see the huge difference in our UVs. So this is definitely a much better way of doing UVs for this part, right? So I'm happy with this. Next, I just simply have to position it back into place. And I think there's really no reason why we can't overlap our UVs, because this is going to be the same design on both sides, but I can see that the artist that did this base mesh initially did not overlap their UVs, right? Like the legs could be overlapped. So I'm trying to figure out if I want to kind of, might as well stick to what this is, right? Normally I would overlap these, so I would actually go out of the symmetry mode, I would select one, I would go to transform, and then I would flip it, then select both of them and do a stack. And you can see that it's stacking them, which means in Substance Painter, if you paint here, it's going to paint both of them at the same time. That's essentially what that means. But this is not the case here, so I'm just gonna, I think, manually, let's go ahead and scale this down. Press R. And if you want to know the size, the actual proportional size of this, you could double click on something, doesn't matter what it is, and you can go into texel density and say a get, and there's a value here that will be given to you, which in this case it's 2.67. I can now select these and do a set, and that is going to match the proportions of the UVs to all the other pieces. So now I know that these are exactly precise the same scale, right? Which is going to be important when you're painting. Now, this is just not as important, but it's just a matter of fitting these back on the sheet, the UV sheet. It doesn't really matter where you put it. It just has to kind of fit in nicely. And sort of makes sense, right? So this makes sense. Now, one thing I will say is that in this case, if you were at a game studio, you would probably be told that there's a lot of empty space here, and which means all of this UV space is being wasted. So some of the elements could be larger, and usually if you are not sure which elements of the texture to make larger to utilize the rest of the empty space, I could just tell you it's usually stuff that ends up holding things that are text or logos. For example, if in the texture this part of the character has, you know, an emblem or a logo, right, then this part right here is what you want to be a little larger, because then the resolution of your symbol or logo is going to be much more clear, especially with the game texture. If this is like a 1K or 512 texture, this piece would make sense to be larger. So kind of giving you extra information here, but for our sake, I'm not I'm happy with this layout. It's good enough, so let's just go with this. So what I'm gonna do next is just simply call this done, and let's save this. So I'm gonna save this as a Maya base mesh. I actually called it Maya base male, and now since we have adjusted the feet, we redid the UVs, let's jump back into ZBrush and do some more fun sculpting and actually do some detail for our skin, and maybe even adjust the proportions of this character just for fun. So let's export this out. I'm going to select this. When you select it, you could do some cleanup. You could call this base male body if you wanted to, You could also see that the channel box has history. Maybe clean this out and do Control S to save your scene. So now you're kind of nice and clean. Now I'm going to export this out back, overwriting the other OBJ file, and then let's bring it into ZBrush. Alright, so I'm going to jump into ZBrush, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the layer with the original base mesh, and I'm just going to do an import and grab my OBJ file and just simply import it right over the other one. And you can see that it's been updated because the feet are different, right? So you know this is our new file that we just modified in Maya. And the cool thing is, again, you can see that it came in with the same scale, proportions, and positioning, right? So it's exactly the same. And if you wanted to double check your UVs, you can also go to UV Master and do a flatten, and you can see the new UVs that we just tweaked, right? Now they are flipped, but that's okay. That's something that ZBrush does. We can flip it back on export, but you can see that they are exactly the same UVs. So let's do unflatten. And in the next part, let's go ahead and begin sculpting on this character and giving him a cool outfit that we can use to bake in Substance Painter.